Lovely. Okay. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, and I hope you're still all awake. This will be slightly different to most of the presentations that you've heard, but actually I think it will nicely pick up some of the points. Oh, I'm not quite sure as I thought I was. Okay. Is that okay? Yeah? Yeah. Okay. Up, down. Right, okay, I'll try not to move. So it's a little bit different, but I think it picks up a lot of the things that have been discussed throughout the day. So really, I want to tell you a little bit about the organisation, how it works, the River Restoration Centre, and then go and pick out some of the examples of the things that we've actually been working on throughout the time that I've been there, but most of them are new things. And how they fit. So what is the River Restoration Centre? Well, it's an information and advice centre, and it covers all aspects of river restoration and river management as well, so that's quite important that you make the link between those two elements. And there are three areas that we really focus on, and these are the points that I will be going back to afterwards. But one's knowledge exchange on those activities with river restoration and management. One is, oh, hang on a minute, going to have a problem here. Bad planning, you didn't expect to have somebody who's 5 foot nothing. I don't mind if you can't see my face on the camera, it's fine. I like keeping you awake, if nothing else. Okay, right, fine. The second one is case-specific advice and assessment on river restoration projects, and I will talk to you a little bit more about that afterwards, and also guidance and mentoring. So that are the three remits of our business plan, if you like, or raison d'etre. So how do we deal with that? Well, in very simple terms, we have a hub of people and we deal with inquiries, anything to do with river restoration. And what I would say is we get all the difficult questions, all the easy ones other people will do themselves. We get the complicated, integrated projects that everybody else doesn't want anything to do with, and that makes our life challenging, interesting, but at times very difficult as well. And then we provide that specific information and advice based on practice from right across the UK, and it's because we have that central depository of information and case studies that we're able to help other people and understand where the best practice is and where the problems have occurred as well in different areas, and what has and what hasn't worked. And then we have a set of core funders and members, and that's absolutely essential to the way that we run, and they fund the river restoration. But what's absolutely critical about the way that the centre works is our independence. So we're not a consultancy. We have an independent view, and we don't have to sort of operate within any constraints. Which has its good and its bad points. So the reason why RRC, or the River Restoration Centre, exists is because most of our organisations, our main agencies across the UK, so that's England, Scotland, Wales now as a separate entity, and Northern Ireland, are signed up to what we do and appreciate what we're doing, I hope. And then we have a series of members organisations and individuals as well who are part of that mix. Just to give you an idea of how we operate, because we probably operate a slightly different way to most organisations. We have a core team here, this is my team, and then we have a support team. We stick the managing director on his own, in his own office, and and he pops out every now and again. That's Martin, for those of you who know him, Martin Janes. But we also have, more seriously, we have a reporting body, but also we have expert advisors as well, which we call into the organisation for specific problems and issues as well. So we have a lot of capacity to do a lot of different things. So what I'm going to do is to give you an idea of what some of those things are. So the first thing I wanted to talk a little bit about is knowledge exchange and what we've been doing with that. Maybe, if you're lucky. Right, okay. So we have a range of core activities that we deliver, and if you want to know anything about these, just let us know and you can have access to any of this information. So we have newsletters which are sent out by email, and bulletins, and they tell you exactly what's going on within the river restoration world, primarily in the UK. But as you'll see later, we've been involved in a European project, so we like to have that sort of dissemination across countries. So if you think there's something that you think we would be interested in, just contact us and we will make sure that we include an article within our one of our bulletins or newsletters, and we're really keen to do that. We have an annual network conference, normally attracts about 250 people, so hopefully there'll be a workshop this year for the Reform conference, Reform project as well. So again, if you want to know a bit more about that, that's in May. And it's a brilliant way of bringing practitioners and academics together in one room, and a whole range of people from different backgrounds. We then have workshops, and that's part of our communication as well, and our training as well. And we have themed workshops and training modules. And then the final thing we do is actually take people out onto the river and discuss the issues surrounding particular restoration schemes. And we're not frightened about asking what went well and what didn't go well, and we found that's been really, really useful, and we forewarn the people who've offered to take people round the sites that they will be expected to be honest about that, and those have proved to be really, really useful. So one of our core things, our core activity, is called the National River Restoration Inventory. Now, obviously, you know about the Reform Wiki, and there are various sort of tools out there that do this kind of work. But this one is specifically for the UK. And what we've tried to do here is to try to put case studies together, to put information that is specific for an audience of practitioners and hopefully for planners as well, that they can then identify not only where there's best practice river restoration projects near them, but also ones that there's potential projects as well, so they can identify those within the planning process. That's early days, that side of things, but that is what we're hoping will also be useful in the future, and I'll talk a bit more about that later. And so you can go down, you can home in to the different parts of the UK, and then it gives you an idea of some case studies, completed projects, and also we have potential projects on there. And then you can click on the individual dots. I don't know whether you can see them here. There are some dots along here, the different restoration schemes, and that will bring up a specific case study in some cases, or a bit more information about those projects. The other thing we've been doing in this area is working on the Restore project. I don't know how many of you have heard about that. Actually, a show of hands, who's heard of Restore? Oh, a few. Okay, not everybody. Right, if you want to know more about the Restore project, I suggest you go to the restorerivers.eu. It's kind of a precursor to the Reform project, and you will notice there is a river wiki there as well. The idea of the Restore project was to actually provide the communication and the information and try and gather that around Europe, 21 countries, to try and identify where the bottlenecks were, where the issues were in terms of river restoration. And this project has just come to an end now, so it's very timely that Reform is now taking on the mantle of looking at providing tools for this scientific appraisal. And so that's the next sort of phase on. But I would suggest you go to that website, because there's an awful lot of information, not only the wiki on there, but a lot of information about river restoration, and it's tried to collate all that information together on specific themes, everything from hydropower to land management to ecology, and even fish are in there somewhere as well. You'll be pleased, Ian. So the point is, it's a useful repository of information, and it will continue to be managed by the European Centre of River Restoration, of which Martin, our Managing Director, is a board member. And so there is a continuous link between this project and also Reform as well, so please use it. The second thing that we do is guidance and mentoring to inform best practice. One of the things that we've just finished, actually, is a manual of techniques, and it's a useful tool. Have a look on our website, which is therrc.co.uk. I had hoped that I'd be able to do something a bit more interactive, but I was told that because it was being filmed, that probably wasn't a good idea. And given the problems I had with the microphone, they were probably right. So we had an original manual of techniques in 1999. We had an update of river restoration techniques in about 2003. And we've just subsequently brought out a new one as well, of which there's a new 17 new techniques. They're there to try and provide examples of best practice of river restoration in different environments for practitioners. So it's not a cookbook for engineers, but it's supposed to give you ideas and identify in what kind of situations you might be able to use these projects. They are everything from sort of natural river restoration, if you like, no constraints, as little intervention as is feasible, to a practical approach where, okay, we're in an urban area, there is absolutely nothing else we can do but, for example, put a rock ramp within the river. And so it does everything from one extreme to the other, and it recognises those constraints and provides information as to the rationale as to why those projects were done in a certain way. One of the things that's quite interesting is we went back and reviewed the existing projects, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to see whether there was any post-project appraisal, as in this little bit here. This particular project here, as you can see, there is a graph of, I believe, fish. That is unusual. Most of the 40-odd projects were in there, although when we asked had they done some post-project appraisal, in fact, it consisted of a photograph, or maybe two if we were lucky. And these are supposed to be the best case studies across the UK, and it was very disappointing for us to see that even those had not had any appraisal over the last 10, 15 years. Makes it very difficult, obviously, for us to then assess what is going on with these projects. But we provided the information that was available for each of these. And then these are the new techniques based on what has been done more recently. This happens to be the rock ramp in an extraordinarily constrained place in Northern Ireland, in Coleraine. Fascinating site if you ever get a chance to go there, where they have put a rock ramp where there was absolutely no space at all. And the local mayor happens to be a fisherman, and he has aspirations that the fish will go up this rock ramp, which I think they probably will, but they are going to then have to go through a culvert. We'll see how successful that is. But in terms of actually the technique, it is a really, really good design, which is the reason why it's in the manual. And there is discussion about the benefits and potential issues surrounding it. The second thing that we've been working on, and this fits in very nicely with what Ian was talking about, is monitoring appraisal. Once upon a time, about 6 years ago, there was a project called in the south of the UK, fairly about sort of, I suppose, about 30 miles south of London. It's called Shopham Loop. There was quite a lot of money, relatively speaking, put aside to do some monitoring of this project, and a group of people did various elements of monitoring. There were some objectives put together, but they were quite loose. The monitoring went on for 3 years, and unfortunately, at the end of it, we could identify some trajectory of change, but really it was quite difficult to identify specific confirmation that the restoration has been successful from an ecological point of view or a geomorphological point of view. There were some elements that were quite clear and you could identify that were successful. We had a person who actually looked at all of that information for over a year, and it frustrated the life out of him. And if Angela is still here, if you ever want to, yes, your certain PhD student, James, if you ever really want to upset him, just say shop him, and he'll probably run a mile. Drove him insane. But the point being that it made us start thinking before a lot of this that Ian was talking about was really sort of thought about, that actually we need to think about having clear objectives for our projects and being confident that we can actually apply our monitoring strategy to those objectives, and we understand why we're doing it and what we can achieve and how to do it most cost effectively. So therein was born what's called Pragmo, but we wish we'd never called it that, but the name seems to have stuck, and you will find all the documentation for this on our website if you want to go to it. This element here, oops, sorry. Oh no, hang on. I need to go back. How do I go back? Yeah, 1, 2. Okay. This element here was born from a workshop that we had of various people, experts around field, to try and identify what the main issues were and the main linkages between processes and ecology as well. And you may not be able to see from here, but I can assure you that some of the questions at the top here are asking you about what do you know about your water quality, and what do you know about the amount of water that you have in your system before you start looking at any of the other elements of your potential monitoring. If you don't know those issues here, then you need to be thinking about that. If the water quality is bad, you probably need to be fixing that before you do anything else, or at least in tandem with these other elements to improve the habitat and the physical processes as well. So this is kind of the thinking behind the tool. The idea of it is to try and allow local communities and local authorities and practitioners to identify what is the best way in terms of monitoring, what you need to monitor, so that you can provide it in the most cost-effective fashion. And associated with this guidance is a whole sort of a flow diagram here, which obviously you can't see, but you get the general idea. Is it identifies a yes and no targets, and it's linked to each element of the manual here. There's certain sections that you can ask more questions about as you go down, and then it identifies whether you should actually you've got a robust monitoring strategy or not before you even start doing the monitoring. You can then look at identify what you need to do after that. Another thing that we've been involved with is a project called the gauging weirs, to remove them or replace them. Within the UK, we have a massive, very good system, for the most part, of gauging assessments. Some of them, and they're very important, and I'm not for a moment advocating we should get rid of them. Some of them are not fit for purpose, and they're attached to weirs. Some of those weirs are either crumbling, and in some cases the weirs go out of top when they're trying to monitor flood events, and others are for flood events when they're meant to be trying to estimate low flows. So some of them are not appropriate and not fit for purpose. What we were finding was that anybody who was in the hydrometrics teams was saying, we want all of this system kept in place. But obviously that's at loggerheads with the benefits of WFD and trying to implement WFD and improve fish passage. So we got these two groups of people together in the same room, which was quite scary, actually. When they first came together, if there'd been a bag of tomatoes in the corner, I think they would have been thrown. But by the end, we actually made a really, really good breakthrough in terms of them recognising when you could remove some of these structures and why, and what the rationale, where we were trying to go with it. And we ended up with a protocol of questions that you need to think about, that thought about both sides of the argument. And again, that's freely available, so you can have a look at that as well if you need to. Then the other thing that we get involved with is case-specific advice. The importance of that is to kickstart projects. As I said before, we're not a consultant, we're not a design consultant, but we can often see what is practical solutions, ideas, processes that might be appropriate within a river. Really to try and get away from something, like this, to aspirationally maybe something like that. And we will provide reports, and those reports might take stuff out of our own manual if we think that's appropriate, as an example of what you might be able to do, or they might be, in the case of simple maps like this, with the types of issues and keys and additional information associated with them. There's simple, straightforward guidance to start your project, and we do quite a lot of that. Or they might be very simple sketch diagrams that give you an idea of what you might do as bank protection. In this case, it's using vegetation to help with the processes of bank erosion, where there was absolutely it had to be dealt with. There was a path right by the side, and you couldn't move the path. So it's that kind of thing that we quite often do. Sometimes we're in a position where, or quite often actually, where each of those three elements that I've gone through come together within one project, and that's quite nice. It means all those things are pulled together, but it's also quite challenging. What we've been involved with fairly recently is it's called the Catchment Restoration Fund. Now, this is £28 million. Wow, you think? But it's spread between 42 projects, and that £28 million has been provided by central government, and it's administered by the Environment Agency across those 42 projects. And it's so when you start divvying it up in terms of catchment restoration fund, it's actually a relatively small amount of money. And what we've been doing is, first of all, we assessed those projects. As you can imagine, once everybody got wind that there was some money around, there was applications from everybody. And so we tried to identify the best of those projects. And we started to do a monitoring assessment of those projects, which I'll talk to you about in just a minute. But what I wanted to just say, first of all, is one of the things that I think has come out of this project in terms of has been what exactly is meant by catchment restoration on the ground. How do you actually achieve it? And I think one of the things has clearly come out of this is that actually in the UK, although we've been talking about catchment restoration, quite often it's very opportunistic in terms of river restoration. And these projects are still, not all of them, but a lot of them are still fairly opportunistic. And what has come out of that project is there's now a new phase that is just about to start with across the UK. It's called the catchment-based approach, and the idea is that partners get together, that's communities, local authorities, a range of stakeholders, to try and identify all the issues at the catchment level and try and identify how all those linkages work within the river and the floodplain as well. And that seems to be the way that England, not the whole of UK, but England is going about the process of improving our rivers. So one thing we've been doing is we've been trying to start to monitor the process. Now, we talked about getting clear objectives for each of those projects, and I think I'm okay. We talked about what I was going to say, how to do monitoring. Now, the thing is with each of these projects is that they are mainly organised by what we call rivers trusts, and they are charities that work around the UK, and the money has been given to them for them to work locally to achieve WFD benefits, but with very little or no money for monitoring. Now, there's a surprise to you, but that's the way it is. And so what we've been trying to do is to try and help facilitate that process, to help people to concentrate and identify which elements they absolutely need to monitor and which ones they can have a reasonable confidence is going to give them some explanation and that their project has been beneficial. In some projects, it may be that we turn around and say, there's absolutely no point you monitoring very much about this, apart from taking some fixed point photography. In others, we may say, actually, you really need to get a real sort of detailed assessment of this particular project. Now, normally, this is in a big spreadsheet, but we've already seen that spreadsheets don't work on a PowerPoint. So what we ask is questions like, why are you going to do your monitoring? What's your target? What are you trying to observe? How are you going to do it? What methods are you going to use? When are you going to do it? Is it any point doing it next week, next year, or actually what you're thinking about won't show any change until 10 years' time, in which case it might not be worth doing it within the context of this project? Who's going to do it? Have you thought about who's going to do it? What data already exists? How much is it going to cost, which is can always be a big issue. And from that, you can then prioritise what you feel you can actually achieve. And it takes account of all of those elements. There is one other element as well, which is who is going to analyse the data and how are you going to do it. It's all very well collecting it, but then you have to make sure that you know what you're going to do with it as well. So that is what we're just starting the process of doing. We've tested it on 1 or 2 sites. It seems to work really well in terms of prioritising things. Be interesting to see how it works with a whole range of different groups across the country. So watch this space, I think, is the answer for that one. And the last thing I'm just going to very quickly talk about is across the UK, take that back, across England, there are 11, I think, what are called nature improvement areas. And they are trying to work at the catchment scale and trying to identify the benefits of a whole range of things. So it's not just river restoration, it's land management, it's looking at protected species, a whole range of things. And it's got a whole range of stakeholders, our wildlife trusts, Natural England, a Rivers Trust, a whole range of people are involved with these projects. And we're involved with one, which is the River Nen. And there are different objectives and other partners, but the one that we're involved with is improving the ecological status of the river to enhance ecosystem service provision and inform also the next round of the river basin management plans. We have one guy who's working on this. As you can see, there's 69 water bodies within that within the Nene Valley. 31 have been identified as natural. 34 are heavily modified, and 4 are artificial water bodies. At the beginning of this project, it was identified that potentially only 12 would be in good ecological status by 2013. And the main reason why I bring this up is I think that this is probably quite realistic of a lot of projects and catchment scale projects, particularly when they're have quite an element of urban areas and industrial heritage, as this particular project does. So at the moment, we've got to grips with doing some restoration. There's still a heck of a long way to go, I think. So, in terms of summary, the RRC, I don't know what that I forgot what I'd put there. The RRC was formed in 1996 following 2 demonstration sites. The Skern was the one that Ian was talking about, and I didn't include it in my talk today. Just to put into context what Ian was saying, just have to remember that these 2 projects were delivered way before WFD was ever thought about. And so they were quite aspirational, actually, in their own right at the time. And they have, whether they've been 100% successful or not, is open for discussion, and I'm more than happy about that. But what I would say is, possibly without those, maybe the UK wouldn't have gone so far, so quickly in terms of restoring our rivers. And the river restoration inventory that we have has about 2,000 examples of some kind of restoration, which just kind of puts things into perspective. And that is a consequence, I think, and a total follow-up from those 2 demonstration sites. We've delivered the message of river restoration to practitioners, as I said, even before WFD was thought about, and it's been instrumental in delivering best practice across the UK, and it's been critical for delivering that on the ground and the understanding. It's been mentioned a couple of times today, but certainly we're finding now that as you're talking about working much more with communities, getting the communities involved, there is a bottleneck there in terms of the planning process. And that is something that we are acutely aware, and I think, certainly for us, that is where our next exciting adventure begins, and my talk finishes. Thank you.